To his neighbours, Joseph DeAngelo was an unlikable, whinging curmudgeon. No doubt he would have bitched at the nickname they gave him too, Crazy Joe. But that's nothing compared with the label police and prosecutors in the United States are now trying to pin on him. They accuse DeAngelo of being the Golden State Killer, a serial murderer and rapist as vile as has ever lived. In the 1970s and 80s, it's alleged he wreaked havoc all over the state of California, all the while evading capture. And he might have gotten away with it forever, except for some of the most innovative detective work you'll ever see. In a court in Sacramento, California, an extraordinary and shocking piece of history is unfolding. A frail old man is being accused of monstrous crimes.
Joseph James DeAngelo, your true and correct legal name?
But looking at this 72-year-old now, only an angry glare gives away any hint that for decades, Joseph James DeAngelo was America's most wanted man, the Golden State Killer. How confident are you that you have the right man?
It's 100%.
Not a shadow of a doubt.
Not a shadow of a doubt.
If DeAngelo is the notorious Golden State Killer, and the overwhelming evidence says he is, then he is evil beyond comprehension. Someone who committed at least 13 murders, more than 50 rapes, and an untold number of burglaries. As if the violence wasn't enough, the Golden State Killer had another wicked signature. Of the victims he let live, he would often ring them weeks and months after the attacks to continue the terror. The taunting still haunts Margaret Wardlow and Jane Carson Sandler.
He's evil.
Psychological.
He is evil. He's a psychological, evil, psychotic, crazed madman.
Do you think it's just luck of the draw that he didn't kill you?
I think that had it been a couple years later, I think I probably would have died.
A cruel, sadistic serial predator, DeAngelo eluded capture for 42 years. Until a clever cop used some extraordinary nous to nail him. That's his house there.
That is his house right there, where Joe DeAngelo was settled right here in the midst of this, and nobody had any idea.
Bringing the murderer to justice had been Detective Paul Hull's unsuccessful obsession for more than 20 long years. But frustration turned to fruition when he had the idea to upload DNA taken from the Golden State Killer's crime scenes to genealogy websites like Ancestry.com and Gedmatch.com. His hope was that someone searching their family tree might provide a full or partial DNA match. So that's a bit like Tinder for DNA.
I guess that's a way to kind of look at it. The search takes anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. Within a day, I had the list of potential relatives to the Golden State Killer.
The results pointed to Joseph DeAngelo, a little old man living a double life in suburbia, hiding behind the facade of a family man, a law-abiding neighbour, and perhaps, most incredibly of all, a former police officer. This is Sacramento, capital of the world's fifth largest economy. It's the Canberra of California, home to the Golden State's Parliament, its Treasury, and the Governor's residence, and now, tragically, home to one of this country's worst ever serial predators. A monster whose reign of terror began when this was the epitome of the American dream. Back in the mid-70s, there were lots of open spaces, jobs, new housing developments, and an almost small-town innocence. An innocence that evaporated with each and every brutal attack he carried out.
It was about 6:30 in the morning. My husband was just leaving for work, and my 3-year-old son came out of his bedroom and got in bed with me to snuggle. Within 2 minutes, I saw a bright light shining down the hall and someone running down the hall. I hardly had time to react when I looked up, and there was a man wearing a ski mask, holding a large butcher knife.
It was 1976, long before America knew of the Golden State Killer. And 30-year-old Jane Carson Sandler was about to become victim number 5 of a serial rapist stalking the eastern suburbs of Sacramento.
He proceeded to tie us both up, our ankles and our wrists, with shoelaces.
He was tying your son up?
Yes, and he gagged us both. And he blindfolded us both. I'm wondering, what is this guy contemplating? And he did it for the longest time. And then, as soon as he untied my ankles, then I knew what he was there for. The fear was so overwhelming. I'll never forget it.
Callously, after sexually assaulting her, the attacker spent more than an hour inside Jane's house, helping himself to what was in her cupboards, and even cooking a meal before finally leaving.
When you found out that you were victim number 5 and that your rapist was a serial offender, did that make any difference to how you felt?
Well, I figured if I was number 5, there's going to be probably a number 6, 7, 8, but I never realized it would be up to 50. I mean, it was crazy.
Why the police can't catch the rapist and worried about their own homes being violated.
I put locks on my doors.
A sex attacker on the loose became the lead story
The next rape could be anywhere.
in every Sacramento news bulletin. He was quickly branded the East Area Rapist, and each new assault led to ever-increasing fear in thousands of family homes.
And it was like at least once a week, and one night we had 2 rapes in one night, and that really sent us on a spin.
No wonder there was paranoia in the suburbs.
Yes, everybody was afraid.
Carol Daly is a force to be reckoned with.
If you are going to defend yourself, you must injure your attacker.
In the 70s, she was one of the lead investigators tracking the movements of the East Area Rapist and counselling 27 of his victims.
It was absolutely an obsession to be able to find out who this rapist was.
He left an extensive trail of destruction, didn't he?
Hardware stores didn't have locks on the shelves anymore. Guns were flying off the shelves as well. Everybody was a suspect. And we got to thinking maybe he has a law enforcement background or maybe he's military. Because of the method of operation, he was a pro at making sure nobody was going to know who he was.
This is the house that I lived in with my mother in 1977 when the attack took place.
And where is your bedroom?
My bedroom was downstairs.
And he could see straight in.
He could see straight in, yeah.
Margaret Wardlow was 13 when she became the East Area Rapist's youngest victim. Ironically, she was obsessed with the case and had read dozens of newspaper stories on the attacks. So when he came for her, Margaret knew exactly what she had to do to survive.
He had an MO, and that was he would place these plates on the back of the husband and tell the husband, if I hear these plates rattle, I'm going to kill your wife and I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to kill you.
And this night he put the plates on your mum's back.
Yes, I heard the plates and I could hear him go into her room, and at that moment it was almost like a calming voice inside of me that says, you know, you're going to get raped, this is what's going to happen, but you're going to survive, you're going to get through this, it's going to be okay. All the way through the attack, I was just saying no, and you know.
It's courageous.
He really got off on power and control through fear. The fear in his victims is how he really got pleasure from what I could understand from everything I'd read. And so for me, being able to tell him, I don't care what you do, that was my way of telling him, You mean nothing to me. I'm not afraid of you.
The tally of victims rapidly climbed to almost 30.
And still, nobody even knows what he looks like.
But what was more terrifying, the East Area Rapist's passion for violence had begun to escalate.
We knew he was ready to kill. We were afraid our next phone call was going to be to a homicide scene instead of a rape scene.
And it was.
Yes.
Coming up, the man who knew the accused killer best.
You thought he was quite smart, did you?
Oh, yeah. He knew everything that needed to be known about law enforcement.
The incredible breakthrough
This newfangled DNA technology. And I was like, well, let me see what I can do.
leads police to their man.
Within a day, I had the list of potential relatives.
That's next on 60 Minutes.
Joseph DeAngelo.
72-year-old Joseph DeAngelo is accused of being one of America's worst serial murderers and rapists. He managed to evade capture for over 40 years, and that's likely because he was a police officer. It was a career that began here in the tiny town of Exeter, California, and where he learnt to hide his criminal perversions.
You thought he was quite smart, did you?
Oh, yeah. He knew everything about everything that needed to be known about law enforcement.
Up until a few months ago, Farrell Ward counted Joseph DeAngelo an old friend. They worked together as police officers in Exeter and socialised on the weekends. Farrell now looks back at the crime scenes they attended together with a very different perspective on his brother-in-arms. DeAngelo had everyone, including his law enforcement colleagues, fooled.
If he'd committed a crime here in Exeter, he would come out and do the follow-up investigation, and there wouldn't be no evidence, because if he turned up any evidence, it'd probably most likely been him.
He could destroy it.
Yes, very easily. Yeah. And no one could have picked it up because he was just that good at what he did. I mean, he was he was free for what, 40 years, 45 years in the FBI, and the very best technology they got out there, they couldn't find the guy, you know.
So maybe you were right. Maybe he was smart after all.
Oh yeah, he was. He was one smart cookie.
So this is the neighborhood where the East Area Rapist started attacking.
But ultimately, not as smart as Detective Paul Holes, who, after more than 2 decades of investigating, finally figured out DeAngelo's lies.
All the houses are single story. He rarely went into a neighborhood that had 2-story houses. He liked to move around, hop fences, and move through the backyards.
Detective Holes says in the mid-1970s, Joseph DeAngelo moved from Exeter to the suburbs of Sacramento, which then became the rogue cop's new hunting ground.
As far as the law enforcement training, he understood exactly how patrol was going to respond to an attack that had occurred. And so he would park his car at locations so he could, as law enforcement is potentially responding, slip through that and get to his vehicle many blocks away from where the victim's house was to be able to drive.
Joseph DeAngelo used to work here, a police officer by day, and by night, the East Area Rapist. The first 44 rapes and 2 murders were committed while he was a cop here, until he was caught shoplifting a can of dog repellent and a hammer. The police chief sacked him on the spot. And a few weeks later, a prowler turned up at the chief's home outside his daughter's window. He was convinced it was a vengeful DeAngelo. But staggeringly, the police chief never followed it up. It was the one big clue that could have put a stop to all the killing.
Jane, when no one followed up his dismissal from the police force for shoplifting.
Yes, it's crazy.
For rape victim Jane Carson Sandler, that oversight should have been the moment Joseph DeAngelo's secret was uncovered.
That's surprising, isn't it?
Very surprising.
That's probably the biggest miss of the entire investigation.
I
isn't it?
agree. I agree. I agree.
In 1979, the spree of sexual assaults in Sacramento stopped abruptly for no obvious reason. What investigators didn't know was their biggest fear had come true. This sadistic, violent rapist was on the move again and had become even more brazen. When the East Area rapist re-emerged in Southern California, it was as a fully fledged serial killer.
So he starts off as the East Area rapist,
That's correct.
and that name gets changed to the Golden State Killer.
Yes. So you see an offender that over the course of more than a decade, he's moving through the state, and at that point in time, law enforcement is not conclusively connecting the dots that this is the same guy. He is probably the only offender that I know who has had different monikers when it was an unsolved series.
The Golden State Killer murdered 13 people across the state of California. Added to the 50 rapes and various other assaults and kidnappings, he became one of the United States' most hunted fugitives. Every detective in the country wanted to solve the crimes, including Detective Paul Holes, who first got his hands on the case files in 1994.
You started investigating this just as DNA technology was becoming a real thing for law enforcement, didn't you?
That is the reason why I initially decided, well, I need to look at this case because I have this newfangled DNA technology. And I was like, well, let me see what I can do. And since 2001, the Golden State Killer's DNA profile was up in the FBI's CODIS system, which is the FBI's DNA database.
That's a national database.
That's a national database. It's over 16 million profiles in that database. It didn't hit.
Because Joseph DeAngelo had never been convicted of any crime, in trouble with the police on that level. He was not in any database.
He had never been convicted of a crime that qualified him to be compelled to give his DNA to be put into a database.
So how did you find him?
So that's where, as I sat back, just almost feeling defeated about all these years, haven't found this guy, how am I going to get this case to progress? And that's when I learned about this technique using genealogy and DNA.
Paul Holes discovered that family history websites like Ancestry.com and Gedmatch.com can help track down persons of interest. One of their features is that you can enter your own DNA to find long-lost family members. But Holes took it to the next step. Using DNA collected from the Golden State Killer's crime scenes, he uploaded it to see if he could get any matches. It was a brilliant thought. Smart, modern detective work.
Were you doing this, though, on a clandestine level? Did you have to create a false profile?
Yes. So we created an undercover profile and uploaded the Golden State Killer's DNA profile into Gedmatch. Within a day, I had the list of potential relatives to the Golden State Killer out of Gedmatch.
What was your shortlist?
So we ended up with roughly 5 males that had California connections that were of the right age that caused us to have to do a little bit more research on who these individuals were to see if they had any other aspects of them that caused us to, well, we might need to look at them closer as a potential suspect.
That shortlist had the name Joseph James DeAngelo. He fit the profile of the Golden State Killer perfectly. He lived in Sacramento and was the right age to commit the crimes. After secretly watching him for days, police took a used tissue out of his garbage bin and tested it for a definitive DNA match. It came up positive. The fantastic gotcha moment.
There is no question that Joseph DeAngelo is the Golden State Killer. The DNA evidence that we have in this case is conclusive.
Coming up, staring down the Golden State Killer.
Hopefully he'll stay here till the day he dies.
And case closed for a good cop.
After 24 years of looking for this guy, I got you.
That's next on 60 Minutes. Margaret Wardlow and Jane Carson Sandler have waited 40 years to look the man who raped them in the eyes. Today is that day. But looking at the shuffling, frail, elderly man in orange prison overalls, it's hard to picture the Golden State Killer, the monster behind at least 50 rapes and 13 murders.
Seeing him in that orange jumpsuit, it must have given you some pleasure.
Yes, I feel there's closure. I know where he is now. I've taken pictures of this building. I know where he is, and this is, hopefully he'll stay here till the day he dies.
For Paul Holes, it's surreal to know the man he'd spent half his life searching for is now behind bars.
After 24 years of looking for this guy and trying to identify him, to see him, in the interview room, on the computer monitor as I'm watching him just sit there looking dejected, was a reward in and of itself. Going, I got you.
42 years after his first sadistic rape, Joseph DeAngelo was finally arrested here at his home, hiding in plain sight among his suburban hunting grounds. A retired father of 3 daughters, he's been married to a local divorce lawyer for all those years. And ironically, despite specialising in the trade and being estranged from him since 1991, she has never divorced Joseph. You see, the law here says communication between spouses is privileged. You can't be forced to testify against your husband or your wife in court. In short, we may never know exactly what she knows.
I have said all through the years, somebody knew who the rapist was.
Former lead investigator Carol Daly still can't work out why suspicions about DeAngelo weren't raised earlier.
He had a different ski mask for almost every rape, a different jacket, different shoes. If he threw them away after each use, I have no idea. What did he do with everything he stole? Did he bring them into his house? Did he hide them somewhere?
So if you were a partner or a wife,
Right.
you think you would have some sort of inclination that something was going on.
I would think so, but then, if he was out all hours of the night, it would either be divorce time or wondering, what are you up to?
The Golden State Killer case is unprecedented in many ways, but above all, for the way it was solved. Perhaps it's a look into where future police investigation is heading. And that could mean cold cases all over the world could be reopened to make use of the ever-increasing wealth of DNA material stored on genealogy websites.
It's a much more precise tool to be able to allow law enforcement to actually identify this guy that is committing these atrocities. And we're not seeing anything about who you are genetically. We just know, you shared a common ancestor many generations ago with our guy.
At some time, somewhere in a penitentiary here in California, somebody will walk into a jail cell and say, "Sorry I put you in there, Uncle Joe. I was just looking for some distant relatives in Norway or Italy."
There could be that scenario, absolutely.
As it stands, Joseph DeAngelo will be tried for the 13 murders he is accused of. The 50 rapes fall outside the statute of limitations in California. But for his victims, including Margaret Wardlow, any justice is enough for the cruel man whose identity she thought she'd never know.
What I hope for him is I hope that he lives a long and very healthy life. And he's going to be doing that behind bars with some other characters that they're probably not going to like him very much.
You'd like him to have a long time in that orange jumpsuit.
A long, healthy life, yes. I like the fact that he's not going to be fishing. I like the fact that he's not going to be riding his motorcycle. I think these things are, that's okay with me.
Hello, I'm Liam Bartlett. Thanks for watching. To keep up with the latest from 60 Minutes Australia, make sure you subscribe to our channel. You can also download the 9Now app for full episodes and other exclusive 60 Minutes content.